Pose for the camera. Show me your best pose. That's a pretty good pose. I like it. We're talking about plumb lines right now?
Yes.
Dope.
It's going to be unlit and untranslucent, and then we're good.
So they're fixed?
What's that?
Are they fixed? Are they going to be fixed in next year?
Are they lit AF?
They're going to be back?
Yes, they will be back.
And unlit AF.
Oh, so they're not lit. That's not fun.
No, they're not lit.
We want our plumb lines to be lit, dude.
We do not want them lit.
Not. So what we're saying is it's not a beach party.
We want our game to be lit. We want our plumb lines to be extra.
I'm going to go away now. He's back from his trip.
What's up? I'm still alive. Can't get rid of me that easily.
You didn't die falling from a rope.
No. Never.
Okay, cool. So you showed me this last week, but I wanted to talk about it before we get out of here. There's some new controller stuff going into the game.
Yeah, just a little bit. I wanted to give controller players some love because I think there were a couple of really problematic spots if you're playing with controller that make the experience worse compared to mouse and keyboard.
We demoed the game. It was the first time demoing the game with a gamepad to the public.
Yeah.
At the ID at Xbox event, and that triggered some feedback from us that then sort of caused you to say, "Oh, you know what? Let me take a look at this thing," and you sort of.
Yeah. Well, there were just some, like there is a major overhaul of controller controls happening, which could shift the paradigm of things somewhat, but that's not ready yet. It needs a bit more development time. Mm-hmm. But there are some like low-hanging fruit changes we could make to just improve quality of life on controller. Yeah. And I've had some of those in mind for a while, and that event was sort of a motivator to get them in a little earlier. I think that there are 3 areas on the controller that really were difficult. One was using the terrain tool, and the way that changed the camera mode as soon as you took it out. So you'd be in this mode, and it would do this where you're controlling the cursor, and then you're moving the camera by moving the cursor to the edge of the screen, kind of like in an RTS game.
Right.
But when you took the tool out, it wasn't obvious that had changed. There wasn't really anything that the player could see on screen that was telling them that they were in this new mode or how that mode worked.
Right.
The other thing was placing tethers, which similarly put you in a mode where you have this cursor, and it had that camera mode, and you'd press the tether button, and it would immediately put you in this selection mode. And again, that was fairly confusing. So I wanted to fix placing tethers and using the Deform Tool. So for tether placement, the really obvious kind of improvement we could make there is to just not even bother with cursor placement of the tether at all on controller, unless you wanted to opt into that. So that means when you press the tether button now, it drops it at your feet. And that means you can just be running and drop the tether at your feet as you go, which is what most people are wanting to do anyway, just extend the line.
Right.
It doesn't really reduce the functionality, because if you drop a tether at your feet, we now auto-select the tether for selection, which we actually weren't doing before because of a bug. So now tethers, like all other objects, are automatically highlighted for selection. So as soon as you drop the tether, if you want to pick it up again to move it like you could before, you just press the trigger and you've got it selected. So it's still very quick. If I want to quickly drop and move a tether, it's now 2 buttons, but it's still very quick.
Yeah.
And it's much easier to do the common operation, which is just place a tether and extend my line.
Right. So like players like me who like to put tethers on the top of their caves can still do that.
You can still do that.
Yeah.
There's a little subtle side benefit to this. One of the things that people have given feedback on is wanting to have a better indication of when they're placing the tether, when they're nearing the end of the range, so that they can kind of optimize how much they're spacing their tethers. We have a few ideas on that, but with this approach, which affects mouse and keyboard, by the way, so when you're playing with mouse and keyboard, this will also be the case. You'll press T and it'll place the tether down. There's a subtle thing here with tethers where the length that the line is allowed to stretch between 2 tether posts is a little bit longer than the length that the line is allowed to stretch from a tether post to the astroneer. So that means as you're running, as soon as the line disconnects, if you're at that range and you place a tether, it'll actually connect. So you know that if you place a tether right at the moment that the line disconnects, you're at maximum range. Okay, so then the other thing was the Deform Tool, and this is a bit of a bigger change in terms of, you know, how often you're using these things. So the big complaint with the Deform Tool, again, was that you're in this kind of awkward camera control mode. So you had an ability previously to hold left trigger and it would put you in a kind of first person mode. That style of mode is now the default, except it's not a pure first person mode, it's an over the shoulder third person perspective, but you are still able to control the camera as normal on the right stick and movement is on the left stick.
Right.
And you can adjust how far in the camera's dollied by clicking on the right stick, which I'm not sure if everybody's aware, but if you want to have a nearly first-person perspective, you can bring it in that close. The advantage to this, to keeping the character on screen and not going into a pure first-person mode, is of course that you get to see the astroneer on screen, and so you get to retain the information of your backpack, power, oxygen, and the stuff in your backpack. But you still get this fixed perspective. And this is something that a lot of people have suggested and have wanted for a long time. So now it's really easy for me to run around on controller and deform, and the controls are completely consistent. I can get down there in the caves. If I'm zoomed out and I go into a cave, it's going to bring my perspective in tight automatically.
Nice.
I did a little bit of work on the camera to make sure that we don't kind of freak out
When something's right there in front
when
of you.
something's kind of in your face. You know, you can push the camera right into your body, but it's not gonna jitter the way it did before. Now the left trigger functionality, which used to be that focus mode, that first-person focus mode, is now what just unlocks the cursor, and that just puts you back in the old mode. So if you do want that stable camera and you want the free cursor, it's still there. We just switched the defaults.
Got it.
What this means is that the control is always consistent. So when you're running around with nothing equipped and nothing selected, your left stick is always your movement, your right stick is your camera.
Right.
And now you take out your Deform Tool and your right stick is still your camera and your left stick is still your movement. So it's consistent. Holding left trigger releases the cursor, just as in the standard mode, holding left trigger brings up the cursor.
Got it.
So it's a lot more consistent now, and I think people will find it way more playable. Unrelated to controls, but a couple other little tether fixes that went in, such as making sure that they highlight properly. You also can't just like make them hover in air; they'll actually fall on the ground.
Nice.
And if you deform underneath them, they'll
They'll fall.
fall over
Interesting.
and disconnect if the range gets too far.
Yeah, they used to just like float there wherever they were placed.
They used to just float there, like weird possessed, demonic, infinite mass objects.
Yes.
I think that's about it, except I want to bring people's attention to the fact that on controller you can quick stow things. This is a feature that's been in the game since launch, but there's never a prompt in the game that tutorializes it. But everyone who plays on controller should definitely be aware that if you pick something up with right trigger and then you tap X, it automatically goes into your backpack.
Cool. All right. Awesome. Well, thanks. I appreciate it. And we will see this in the next update, right?
In a few days.
Yes. Awesome. Thanks.
She's my favorite too. Oh yeah. My desk is the fun desk. With all the fun toys.
Everyone's talking about. I think this is the new sediment filter, not the official name, but the sediment processor animation / module.
And it's making hot pink resin.
It's super hot.
It's actually blackberries.
It's making neon blackberry. Is this how you make blackberries in real life? You put sediment into containers and then you filter out the blackberries?
Yes.
Okay. That's how we do it in space?
You're looking a little shy right now.
Just wait a couple minutes.